You probably are already starting to think, is home birth right for me? And if you followed last week, then you probably know a lot of the things that home birth after cesarean apply to also apply for regular home birth. So you can go back and watch that video and you can check out what I said about whether home birth is right for you. The bottom line, though, is that if you feel home birth is right for you and you really don't feel comfortable birthing anywhere else, then it's right for you. Okay? Because here's one thing that you need to know is that if you don't transfer to the hospital, that's a home birth, right? So a home birth is really just the default setting, and a hospital birth is just a home birth transfer. Once you shift your mindset out of thinking that home birth is the fringe and hospital is the norm, and start realizing, wait a minute, if I never go to the hospital, my baby is going to be born, and I don't actually have to go anywhere if I don't want to. And the fact is that hospital birth is the new thing. Okay? I know it seems like your generation and my generation and like the mothers before us and the grandmothers, everybody was in the hospital. But before that, people were birthing at home. Like that was the norm. They didn't always have hospitals. Now, I know what people are going to say. They're going to say, well, that's because babies were dying and they had to get them in the hospitals. But that's not actually the reason why they created the hospital system. It wasn't that babies were dying. If this was all about mothers and safety, then a lot of the practices that are done as routine today would be not done at all, because routine ultrasounds can be off as much as 50% in either direction. It's a coin toss, and it can screw up your plans by pushing you into an induction. Induction of labor can lead to a cesarean. It is harder on your baby. It's forcing your baby out before they're ready. Think about if you're looking at a flower in your garden and you decide, well, this flower is not opening like all the other flowers, so I'm just going to start pulling apart the petals, and that will help it along. What are you going to do? You're going to destroy that flower. It wasn't meant to bloom at that point. When you go out into nature, you really start to observe that there's a balance and there's different nuances that you can really pick up from that. Of, wow, this plant, it's closed up still, but in a few days it will blossom. This one needs more water than the other ones, so it takes longer to grow. This one sprouts up right away. And you start to see that not only that, but the variations of that. There's trees, and then there's another type of tree next to it. And then there's different flowers. If you look at a wildflower garden, it's not all just one flower. It's multiple different flowers at different points. And the seasons change. So the thing is that nature is a feminine energy. And this is what's also in birth. So if you want to ever figure out just exactly how amazing your body is, just go out into nature. Just go and look at a whole bunch of flowers, look at a bunch of trees, watch how things unfold. And then you'll start to see that we all have our own time. We all have our moments when our babies are blossoming, and they don't always follow the same pattern. In fact, another thing I noticed is I've been learning about my menstrual cycle and the power of the moon. I've been getting into a lot of spirituality lately, and I recently found out that I am on a red moon cycle, which means that I ovulate at the new moon and I menstruate at the full moon. And the thing is that back in the days when witchcraft was a big, horrible thing, and when the patriarchy was really trying to take control of the feminine energy, they took every single bit of wisdom that we had about the moon and our cycles and our power as the feminine energy, and then they turned it evil. They said it was evil. So women like myself who bleed on the full moon are considered witches, because we are actually tied into the energy of the high priestess, the one that passes on the wisdom, which kind of makes sense when you think about it. I am currently teaching you and passing on my wisdom, and I'm on a red moon cycle. The white moon cycle is the one that's supposed to follow the pattern of fertility, and just it's constricted. So if you're curious about that, you can always go and Google white moon cycle, red moon cycle, or send me a message. But the basic idea is that when you're planning a home birth, you're coming back into that power. That's the real reason why hospitals pop up everywhere and they're trying to get you to believe that your body is broken. It's all a construct of the patriarchal structure, because men were the first ones that decided to create obstetrics. Before that, it was wise women, it was the midwives, it was the gossips, it was your mothers and your sisters and your aunts and everyone who had come before you, and they passed on that wisdom. But the thing about a physiological birth is that that is the time when you really tap into your power at a different level. You started in menstruation and you start to follow the cycles of the moon or your own rhythm of the cycle. And then when you become a mother, when you're birthing, you really get into it. This is why a lot of the times I've told you that when I was in labor with my daughter, I went into another world. And this is the same thing for Rebecca, one of my clients who had had a home birth after 2 cesareans. And she also went and was transported to another world. Lisa experienced the same, and Jenny is going to be experiencing it this summer. So the thing is that when you get into that experience, you can't go back into the box. It's really hard for someone who has previously had a home birth and a physiological birth to go back into that system once they have discovered what their bodies are capable of. So when you're thinking, oh my God, I just really want a home birth, what you're really tapping into is your own feminine power. Unfortunately, again, what happens is that you're going to get this whole story of how home birth is dangerous. In fact, earlier last week, there was a thread in Scary Mommy about that mom who free birthed her baby in the ocean. I talk a little about this on my Instagram channel. So you can go to @EmpoweringMomsBirth on Instagram. And I've been doing live streams, one every single day since that point on Wednesday. And I'm trying to do a 30-day challenge right now. So if you want more from me besides this weekly live stream, you can go on to Instagram where I talk about different topics each day. All right. So anyway, the idea, of course, was that there was a lot of women who had free birthed and they jumped into this thread. And they said, you know what? Like, I would never go back into the hospital after what I experienced the first time. And I don't blame this mother for wanting to have a free birth. In fact, there's more of us. So there was that collective energy of women who are saying, no, actually, this is really awesome. This is really empowering. And then the other side of that was the fear. There was the ones that were still kind of perpetuating that message that it's dangerous and you can't do it. And then there was one woman who we later found out was a labor and delivery nurse of 20 years. So that made sense, who was basically shaming and blaming and telling us that we were wrong and horrible and selfish and just awful. And that goes back to the whole witch hunt thing. So if you're planning a home birth or thinking about having a home birth, or home birth is just in the back of your mind and you're thinking, I really, really would like to do this, but everybody around me is telling me that it's dangerous, that I'm crazy, that I'm reckless. Like, how can I do that? The fact is, your body is going to do it. And if at any point you feel that you need to transfer because of your own instincts telling you, you know, something just doesn't feel right, I no longer feel comfortable at home, then that's just a hospital birth. It's a home birth transfer. Okay, that's fine. That's what the hospital is there for. It's there for emergencies. But birth is not an emergency. And no book illustrates this clearer than my all-time favorite, you know which one I'm talking about, Reclaiming Childbirth as a Rite of Passage. This is my all-time favorite book to give to people, to tell them about the whole culture of birth and how we got into this mess. It also talks a lot about our feminine power and our birthing power and our cycles. It's truly an excellent book. I highly recommend it. But the thing is, of course, that's not the only book that I'd recommend, because you cannot just get information out of one book. You need to get it out of multiple. Wisdom comes from multiple sources and multiple perspectives. So even though I myself have been doing this for almost 10 years now, and I continue to do this for the rest of my life because I'm just absolutely fascinated and I just love everything there is about birth, I draw from multiple perspectives on this. So I draw from psychology and I draw from society and sociology and philosophy. In fact, I recently sent a message to one of my critical thinking professors, thanking him for the messages that he taught me, because a lot of what I've done with the critical thinking space and helping you to understand how to think about your birth, it comes from what he taught me. So when you draw from the multiple different perspectives of your own life and the life of people who you believe in and who resonate with you, then you can get a fuller picture of what's going on. And this is why home birth is something that if you are really committed to having a physiological birth, I highly recommend home birth. Birth centers are great. They also have a little bit more control and regulation depending on where you go. And hospitals, it's incredibly difficult, not impossible, but difficult to have a true physiological birth and stand in your power because of the way that the system is set up, right? So your hospital, whichever one you're going to, is set up, they have different protocols. And home birth, anything goes, provided you have the right midwife. I'm going to add that because some midwives are still heavily controlled and rigid, and they still want things to go a certain way. And others are not as experienced and skilled. They may have only been in the midwife field for a few years. And so they might not have seen everything. The older and more wise your midwife is, the more she is seen and the more she can possibly help you, as long as she's also let go of her ego. My friend Gloria LeMay also says, as a midwife, she's seen a lot and she's seen things go wrong, but mostly she's seen things go right. And she's got a lot of experience. She's been studying birth for decades now. And she really knows that one of the biggest problems with care providers who have a lot of experience is that they get their ego in the way. So even if you've known a lot of information, you still need to let your ego out of the way because birth, of course, is a physiological process. So how do you set up for that physiological home birth that you're dying for, that you really want, that you absolutely can't wait to have, the one that lights you up when you think about it? How do you set yourself up for that? Well, first of all, you have to accept one thing. You can't control it. Okay? You can't control it. I know I teach you a lot of ways to get past your fears and how to get your partner on board and how to get your care provider on board and how to hire the right people. That part is the controlled environment, but birth itself is uncontrolled. You have to also be willing to go with the flow, just not the flow of the system. You're going with your flow. You're going with what's good to you in that moment, what feels right to you. And your baby has a design of what they're going to do and how they're going to be born, depending on their size, their anatomy, their needs, how they need labor to go. And when you interfere with that process, with the interventions, that's when problems happen. Because now, of course, your uterus is contracting harder than it was supposed to. Or the cushion of fluid that was meant to protect your baby, because the placenta happened to have some membranes that were exposed, is now gone. In fact, I recently learned that amniotomy, which is when they break your bag of waters, has one more risk of which I hadn't really known about until I went and checked out this midwife's page. And she said that sometimes the membranes are exposed in the amniotic sac, and it's like not part of the placenta, it's actual membranes that are loose. And what happens is if they break the bag of waters, they're doing it blind. They might puncture those membranes, and then that leads to a gush of blood. So I've seen sometimes where moms will say, well, you know, my care provider broke my water and it was just blood everywhere. Well, it could be possible that they accidentally ruptured an actual membrane itself that was part of the placenta, and the arteries were exposed, and now you've got blood everywhere. That is a huge emergency. That's why I say, do not let anybody break your waters. They're intact for a reason. That baby may have been needing to be born in the caul, in the amniotic sac, or have it break just before crowning, to protect them. And now that is gone. Or the whole cord around the neck thing is another one. If you mess with that, the cord could slip and fall down, and it's a problem. So with home birth, of course, you don't have any of that. You don't have any of those fears that somebody's going to break your waters. You don't have any fears that somebody's going to give you an unconsented vaginal exam. Nobody's going to force you onto any clocks. As long as you prepare ahead of time, you need to hire the right care provider, and you need to have the right support. You need to have the right education. You need to have the right mindset. You know where I'm going with this. This is the 5 pillars of empowerment here. Right mindset, right education, right environment, right facilitators, right support. And with the home birth, that right mindset starts with getting past your fear and recognizing that if something happens, that you've got this, that you can handle this, because you're going to make backup plans after backup plans for this. I planned my home birth over 2 years before I actually got pregnant, because I needed to make sure that I had every single base covered. I'm one of those people who will go out and make a backup plan for a backup plan for a backup plan. And a lot of my friends have now learned this system, and my clients as well have benefited from learning about that. If you ever have any questions, I do have a Write Your Empowered Birth Plan course, and you can just go to my website and check that out. I am going to be putting up the actual link later, but you can always send me a message or go to my link tree, which is inside of the bio of my Instagram and also on my YouTube channels, and that will take you directly to it. So the thing is that you really want to have that idea in place of all the possibilities of how your birth could go. And that is why it's important to collect birth stories, positive birth stories, not the horror stories from the hospital. We're not trying to scare you here. You want positive birth stories. And so this book here, Ina May's Guide to Childbirth, has the positive home birth stories. In fact, she draws a lot of them from her work at the farm in Tennessee, which has, I think, like a 1% to 2% C-section rate. It's just absolutely amazing what they can do and how they can accomplish. And the women who grow up in that community also know, like, we can do this because they've seen their mothers do it, and they've seen their grandmothers do it, and they've seen their aunts do it. They've seen their cousins, and they've seen their sisters do it. So the people at the farm really understand birth. They understand this delicate process. So Ina May's Guide to Childbirth is absolutely one of my favorites. As you know, I talk about that one just as much as I talk about Reclaiming Childbirth as a Rite of Passage. But Reclaiming Childbirth as a Rite of Passage also has some sort of smaller birth stories. And it also has this whole composite character, Eve, and walks you through the entire physiological process. So you can start to see where the nuances are. And of course, I've shared physiological birth stories inside of this birth group, and you can always check out Instagram. Birth Uprising is one of the channels I like to follow. I also like to follow Your Badass Natural Birth, anything from the Wildflower Birth Collective or Michelle Tiliakos, pretty much all of my luminaries, I follow them too. We're constantly sharing stories. So if you follow me on Instagram, then you'll be able to see who I follow as well. And then once you know who I'm following, then you can get that right education, and the right mindset will start to happen naturally. The Autonomy Mommy, Kylie Banks, is also another one of my good friends, as is Dawn Thompson, Kristen Pascucci. I have so many people that I follow, and that's where I started from, really. When I was starting to plan my home birth, I started following other people. I started following the groups that I knew were going to give me the kind of experience that I wanted. I didn't follow the typical mainstream mommy groups that were just mostly focused on hospital birth, even if it was natural, because I knew that that wasn't going to work. I instinctively knew that I needed to be in a home birth environment. And the other thing I noticed was when I was taking those prenatal classes within this medical system, and all of the other moms were planning hospital births, that didn't make sense to me because I was not planning a hospital birth. So none of that stuff really applied to me. But the free classes that were through my midwife, we had a lot more people who were planning home births or natural births with more physiological mindset. So those classes were taught by an independent childbirth educator who was also a doula, and with the help of a midwife on the side. Okay, so the childbirth education, I actually sought out alternative education that was going to be geared to home birth. And that's why I say you need to have the right education, because if you're just following what's in the mom groups, or you're just randomly following people on social media and you're not intentional about it, you could get the wrong information. Information about how dilated you are doesn't need to happen. Information about how soon you need to go to the hospital. Well, if you're planning a home birth, you don't need that. So toss that too. Anything about labor patterns and how to tell if you're 10 centimeters or 4 centimeters or active labor or all of that, toss it out the window. You don't need any of that. Anything about trying to get yourself into labor before your due date, toss that out the window. You don't need that either, because with a home birth, you're already planning to stay in the safest place for you, right? Right. Now, I know that sometimes you get risked out of home birth just because you go overdue. And the fact is that I have plenty of videos about your due date, and I will be talking more about that in the future. So as for the actual preparation, you don't need to be getting yourself into labor. If you're wondering about evening primrose oil or the red raspberry leaf tea, I've tried it. Okay. I took the evening primrose oil, I stuffed my vagina like a clown car, and nothing happened. Okay. My daughter eventually came out at 40 weeks and 3 days. That's when she decided that she was ready to come. And with my son, I did the same thing. I tried to get things going, and he came out at 41 weeks. So all you're really doing with evening primrose oil is softening your cervix, but nothing else is going to happen if your body's not ready. So you can soften that cervix all you want, but it's not going to efface and it's not going to dilate, because I used that evening primrose oil and I was still posterior, like my cervix was still pointing towards the back, and it was still closed up when I was going into early labor, and nothing was happening. And then I went into labor for real the next night. But the thing is that evening primrose oil, you can have it if you want. If it makes you feel better, you can have it, but it's really messy and you don't have to. Same with red raspberry leaf tea. It tones your uterus. You can use it. It's really nice to have it on hand if you feel that need, but it's also basically a placebo, because it's not going to put you into labor. Castor oil, stay away. Stay away from castor oil. You don't want that. You're going to have a really shitty time. And I mean that literally. Midwives actually joke about this with a meme where they have like a plane flying away from an explosion. And they say, after you've given your client castor oil and you wish them luck. And I'm like, yeah, that's pretty much it. Don't do castor oil. Walking, exercise, acupuncture, acupressure, sex, all of these things to try to get your body going into labor is counterproductive. It's based on that whole thing of you have to do something or you won't go into labor. The fact is that you will go into labor when your body feels safe. So that's, again, the right environment that you need to have. You need to feel safe enough that you can birth your baby. Otherwise, your body is saying there's a tiger chasing you, right? So again, with home birth, you want to set up that environment so it's not stressful. Maybe you get rid of the noise, or maybe you feel safer with a lot of noise and bustle around. Oddly enough, I needed to have my son home. I tried to send him away, and my labor kept doing the stop and start thing and then fizzled out, and I didn't go back into labor for 2 weeks. I needed to have my son. He needed to be in his own bed, and I needed to know that he was safe and that he was secure and that he wasn't missing mommy. That was the only way I could go back into labor. Otherwise, trying to send him away, it just did not work. So maybe that's you. Maybe you need your kids around too if you have other children. Or maybe you don't. Maybe you feel better not having anybody around. Same with for doula support. How do you want your doula to support you? You need to find the right fit doula. Because if you're getting a doula who's very used to being hands-on and handling things and helping you with spinning babies exercises and getting things going, if she's in that space and you're in the space of, I don't want things getting going, I just want to be able to breathe and be able to be in my own element, it's not going to be a good fit. And there's a lot of doulas that we don't sit on our hands. I myself have learned this through the Wise Woman of Way training and through what I learned with luminaries and just what I've observed and experienced as myself when I was birthing my babies. I thought I needed a doula that would be really hands-on. And it turns out that that's not me. I prefer to have everybody leave me alone, including send my partner away to the store. So you really need to know what's going to be best for you. And that's why I said it's important to go with your flow. Because if you decided that you wanted a doula, and then all of a sudden the doula arrives, but it doesn't seem to be a good fit, like you really would rather be alone, it's okay to tell them to leave the room and come back later, or to do something else not directly involved with you. Like maybe they can warm up the towels in the dryer for you, so you have some nice warm towels to wrap around you after your water birth. That's amazing. Maybe during your labor, she can be the one to get washcloths for you and put them inside of an icy bowl of water. This is something I actually recommended for one of my clients because it feels so good. The contrast between the hot water and the cold, icy compress on your neck while you're laboring. I loved it. I loved it. But maybe that's not you. Maybe it's something else that you want. So that's why I say you need to really think about what you want. So for home birth preparation, you're really preparing that environment ahead of time. You're thinking about that environment. You're thinking about the kind of things that you're going to need. You're also thinking about the kind of fears that are going to possibly come up and how you can get reassured and get back on track, because something will come up. I guarantee you something will come up. And when something comes up, it's important that you get back on track so you don't get stuck in your thinking brain and then labor fizzles out. The next one is you want to have the right midwife. I already told you that you need to have the right midwife. And hey, maybe you don't want to call your midwife until the end. That's perfectly okay. That's what I ended up doing. I originally thought that I wanted my midwife there, and then later discovered that I didn't actually want her there monitoring me the whole time. So that's another thing that you really want to figure out. And then the last one, you gotta get your partner to figure out that their role is to hold space for you. Because if they aren't holding space for you, if they don't know how to protect that environment, if they don't know how to keep things going so that you can just get into your space, they can screw the whole thing up. And that's why I have my Get Your Partner on Board with Your Birth Plan mini course that you can always check out, send me a message, or go to my link tree, go to my Instagram where the link tree is in the bio, and you can check it out there. But the fact is that your partner needs to be on board. Okay, your partner has to be on board, because if they're not, and they're the wild card, okay, they're the one that's going to put more fear on you because you have that close relationship with them. You're going to be in tune with them more than you are with your doula and your midwife. You'll pick up on things, maybe little fears that your midwife or doula have, but you'll really pick it up from your partner, especially the more in tune you are with them. You'll pick it up. You can also pick this up from family members and friends. This is why I say that the right support is so important, because our verbal communication is not as important as our nonverbal communication and our energy. You can sometimes walk into a room and you can just kind of feel like something's off, like the person in the room that you're around, they've just got this bad energy. You can tell they're in a bad mood. Even if they tell you that they're fine, you can tell that they're in a bad mood. So that's the same thing with birth. You're very intuitive. You need to be instinctual about it, because if you were out in the wild and suddenly some bad energy came up on you, you'd need to be able to get the hell out of there. Otherwise, it's just not safe for you and your baby. So in birth, we're never more in tune with ourselves than when we are in labor, especially active labor. That's why I say it's labor land. All right. So that's basically what you need to know to prepare for home birth. Okay. You just need to be able to get that right mindset. You need to also know the right education that's going to help you create that right environment, create that right support, and have those right facilitators to help you to move forward in your home birth. And as I said, I've got plenty of great books on home birth. You can always send me a message or send me an email at carly@empoweringmomsbirth.ca. All right, so that's all I have about home birth, and I will see you next week. Talk to you later.